taking place in Syria today is the prelude to what Yahowah calls the Magog War. It is an amalgamation of all Islamic nations. He's going to speak of this war in the prophecies that we're going to consider. And it is based upon the conquest of Syria and the establishment of a Sharia-based government there, deposing the secular dictator, that Sunni Muslims are going to first attack Israel and then launch a jihad on the entire world. It is going to be a war that will be tsunami proportions. Based upon a survey of Yah's testimony, I think it is actually fought in the spring of 2027 is when it will commence. But there is no guarantee that that's the case. It could happen really at any time after the conclusion of the Syrian civil war and after the conclusion of this forcing Israel to forfeit its security, trading land for promises of peace. After those two things happen, it could commence the following day. But I suspect that we're looking at about a dozen years from now. According to this prophecy, this all is the calm before the storm. There is an impending storm, which is even worse than the Magog War. It's one in which America is implemented, or implicated, I should say. America does something beyond just setting up the conditions and arming the belligerents of the Magog War. America is implicated by God, warned by God after the Magog War, and therefore in association with an impending storm. As we move from the 17th to 18th chapters of Yahowah, the United States is criticized for its propensity to fight, for its tendency to take what belongs to others, for its arrogant attitude, for its moronic and immoral rhetoric. God is not humored that Americans have supplied many hundreds of millions of dollars of advanced weaponry to those who will use this arsenal in an attempt to destroy Israel. In fact, my friends, there is the potential that America itself will deploy its military against Israel. Before we begin to dissect the 17th and 18th chapters of Yahowah, Isaiah, since Damascus is cited at the commencement of this prophecy, it behooves us to do our homework. And I want to make a point here. To say prophecy gives the implication, perhaps, that there is a possibility that this might not come true as predicted. I want you to shelve that possibility, because God doesn't predict the future. He reports on what he has already witnessed. Now, this is a very complicated concept that causes many people to jump to erroneous conclusions, like Calvin with predestination. God is not destining our future. He is not ordaining us to our future. He has simply witnessed our future and reported in our past what he has seen. Now you might say, how is that possible? It's again the importance of understanding this transition from material to energy-based, to go from flesh and bones to light, to understand why God equates himself to light, why he took Abraham to see the light of the stars so that he would understand who he is and what he's offering by way of the covenant. This is something that most people would not come to appreciate until fairly recently. It was Einstein that actually opened our minds to this reality. What Einstein discovered is that on a photon of light, time simply is. On a photon of light, the past, the present, and the future all exist simultaneously. Light is not stuck in the flow of time. When we are transformed and empowered to becoming light, as E equals mc squared inverse, then we will be like God in the sense that we will be able to witness the future and report what happens in the future in our past. That's one of the reasons why God's going to create a new heaven and earth, so that we don't mess things up by doing this. But we have the ability to do it. God himself, as light, is able to see all time at one time, which means he has actually witnessed our future. And he has seen where the culmination of human choices take us. And it's not pretty, folks. It's really ugly. And he has chosen when he is going to engage to stop the malfeasance. And he simply told us through this prophet, Yahowah, 2,700 years ago, what was going to happen today and tomorrow. So God is not predicting the future. There is 0% possibility that any of this won't happen as he has asserted. He is reporting future history. He is perfect in this regard. He has never missed a prophecy because he has never predicted the future. He has instead witnessed it and reported in our past what he has seen. Now, the first mention of Damascus in the Torah is in conjunction with Abraham. Isn't everything tied to Abraham? Everything is tied to the covenant. In Bereshith 14:15, during the formation of the covenant, he dispatched some of his associates to Hobah, Abraham did, on the western outskirts of Damascus to rescue his nephew Lot. Then we read, by way of a reference to Eliezer of Damascus, that those associated with Damascus, even with a connection to Abraham, no matter how much they crave the inheritance God has promised his chosen people, these descendants of Ishmael and their supporters will be denied. Yahowah said, now pay close attention. The word of Yahowah came to him to say, this individual, speaking of Eliezer of Damascus, he shall not receive your inheritance. It's the first reference to Damascus, and it says no. No, you're not going to find someone in Damascus receiving the inheritance associated with the covenant. Now, while Abraham's chief of staff may have been a fine man, this Eliezer of Damascus, those he is related to have come to despise everything that God loves. And since there is nothing more important to Yahowah than his covenant and its promises, anyone who is hostile to what he has committed to give his children becomes his foe. This, therefore, is an inauspicious introduction to Damascus. The city is mentioned again in 2 Samuel. David, is attempting to extend his kingdom northward to include Syrians of Damascus. Subsequently, Damascus and Jerusalem become foes, with skirmishes beginning as early as the reign of Solomon, David's son. But as places and people go, no one and no place is as dear to God as David and Jerusalem, the capital of Yahowah. To oppose either is to be in opposition to Yahowah. So this is not encouraging for Damascus either. The capital of Syria comes to the forefront again when Ahaz, as king of Yahowah, Judah, refuses to join a Syrian Israelite, speaking of the northern kingdom, also known as Ephraim, military alliance against Assyria. This ignites the Syro-Ephraimite War of 734 BCE against Yahowah. And it is in this context, in concert with these events, that Yahowah asks Yahshua in the opening of the 7th chapter of this prophetic testimony to meet with King Ahaz. God wants him to disregard the approaching assailants, especially the armies of Aram Damascus and the Amramenians, the state centered around the Syrian capital. Through Yahshua, Yahowah also encourages the king of Yehudah to avoid forming an alliance with Assyria to deflect the impending assault. This advice is all germane to America, especially as it sponsors nuclear treaties with Iran, while supplying weapons to Iran's foes in Syria. Perhaps that is why this prophecy ultimately leads us to the doorstep of the tribulation. We pick up that story in Yahshua 7:5, where we find the following. Aram has plotted evil against you, along with Ephraim. Ephraim is a reference to the northern kingdom of Israel, a nation which was completely destroyed because its leaders formed and broke alliances with Middle Eastern nations in a vain attempt to find peace and security apart from Yahowah. They, like America after them, were even willing to sacrifice the remainder of Israel, especially Jerusalem, to appease their foes. It didn't work out for them. It won't work out for us. Affirming this, the leader of the malevolent alliance in opposition to Yehudah is quoted saying, "Let us go against Yehudah and let us tear her apart, breaking her into pieces so that we can reign over her." This is precisely what Israel's enemies, today's Islamic nations, are planning. And they're doing so with America's blessing. Once America cedes the West Bank to them and most of Jerusalem, they will seek to tear what remains apart, ripping the nation to pieces. And they will act wielding American weaponry as they do so. But rather than prevail, reigning over Israel after America slices the tiny nation into pieces, Muslims will instead be rebuked and blown away by God. And while that is now, 2,600 years ago, it was a different story. We'll share that when we return. Welcome back to Shattering Myths. We are now considering what Yahowah shared with us through his prophet Yahshua. This is chapter 7, the 8th statement. Thus says Yahowah, "This shall not stand, and it shall not happen." Now, what was he saying that is not going to stand? What's not going to happen? The destruction by Aram of Israel. Remember the previous statement, "Let us go against Yehudah," which is Judah. "Let us tear her apart, breaking her into pieces so that we can reign over her." So God's saying, no, not going to happen. It's exactly what's going to transpire as it relates to the tidal wave of Muslims that roar into Israel following the Syrian civil war and following the dissection of Israel in the land for peace deal. They will try, but God's going to stop them. He's not going to stop them right at the beginning. They're going to be devastatingly destructive. It's only until Israel finally recognizes that its IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, are wholly incapable of stopping this flood of Muslims, that God's going to intervene. But God here says, no, this is not going to happen. Because indeed, he says, the head of Aram is the high and mighty, that's what it means, is Damascus, which, by the way, means dung. And the head of Damascus, which is dung, it's a sorrowful weeping sore where corpses are covered in dung, is Ratzin, it's slavery and slaughter. And in another 65 years, Ephraim will be scattered and destroyed as a nation. So what God is doing here is saying, Ephraim's going to get destroyed. And I think it's largely true even in the war that is this Islamic Magog war that Yahweh is telling us is going to occur in our future. That the northern kingdom is once again pummeled. Ephraim's going to get slaughtered. And here he says, Ephraim is going to be slaughtered and destroyed. But Yahowah, which is where Jerusalem is, that's not going to be the case. Yahweh will not stand for that. And so he's identifying the foes. He said, I understand that these guys are high and mighty. They're just filled with their own exuberance over their superiority. Allahu Akbar, after all. My God is better than your God. But Damascus is dung. It's a place where corpses are covered in dung. And the head of Damascus, he says, is slavery and slaughter. That's what Islam is all about, slavery and slaughter. And in another 65 years, he says, Ephraim will be shattered and destroyed as a nation. And so it would be. The Syrian-Ephraim alliance against Yahowah was for naught, as both would be plundered by the foe they sought to avoid. And as a consequence, the northern kingdom was obliterated, and its people were hauled away into slavery by the Assyrians. It's a foretaste of what would come. Yahweh revealed the consequence of showing contempt for him as opposed to relying upon him. He says, and the head of Ephraim is Shemaron, and the head of Shemaron is the son of Ramel Yahu. So if you are not trusting, then indeed you will not endure. What he's saying here is that Ephraim chose Shemaron, Samaria, the capital of the northern kingdom, as its defensive position. Oh yeah, we're going to rally around Samaria. That's our capital. We're going to be patriotic. There's where we will rally against the foe. And he says, no, the head of Samaria, Shemaron, is Ramallah. Today it would be Ramallah in this consequence. It means that which did the evil in the sight of Yahweh is the reference to this place. And so God is saying, if you want to be self-reliant, if you think that you can defend yourselves, have at it. But God said, for those who are not trusting, for those lo amon who are not reliant, who are not established, supported, and upheld by him, then indeed they will not endure. And it's what's going to happen to many Israelites. What's coming to Israel is going to be devastating. And most of the Israelites will die in this conflict because they are not trusting in the rock of their salvation. They have forgotten Yahweh. We'll return to Shattering Myths after the commercial break. So God is telling us that what we are going to see is what has already happened. Now, he was predicting both back at the time he was sharing these words with Yahshua, the prophet Isaiah. He was telling him that 65 years after he revealed this message that Ephraim would be scattered and destroyed as a nation. And it has turned out that way. As a matter of fact, when they talk about the lost tribes of Israel, well, the 10 lost tribes of Israel are all the tribes associated with Ephraim. And they were hauled away into Assyrian captivity. And that they're lost. And God is saying, as it relates to what's going to happen in the future, Ephraim's going to suffer. The northern kingdom is going to suffer. God is far more interested in protecting Yahowah and Jerusalem than he is the northern kingdom. He's ultimately going to make sure that all of Israel survives, and ultimately the entirety of what is Yisrael and Yehudah will be reconciled with Yahowah. We know that to be a fact. But in all of his testimony, the two things that mean the most to him are Yehudah, which is the only one of the 12 tribes that's named after him. Yehudah means to relate to Yahowah and related to Yahowah. When you relate to Yahowah, you can become related to Yahowah. That's what Yehudah means. And secondarily, and I'm not even sure it's secondarily, but as it relates to the place Yehudah, because there's the people, the tribe, the descendants of Jacob called Yehudah, these people who relate to Yahweh and are related to Yahweh. But there's also the place. I know the Yisrael was divided into to Ephraim, the northern kingdom, and to Yehudah. And Yehudah is the kingdom of what we call Judah. And its capital is Jerusalem. Jerusalem means the source from which guidance regarding reconciliation flows. That's what Jerusalem means. It's based on the same verb that Torah is based on. Yaru, from teaching, guidance, direction, instruction. And then Shalom, which means reconciliation, to reconcile a relationship. It is in Jerusalem, which is the capital of and the heart of Yehudah, that Yahweh meets with his people. That's where his house is when he camps out with his people. It is where he fulfilled all four of the first four Mikre, Pesach, Matzah, Bikurim, and Shavuah. It is where he's going to return. It is what he is most interested in protecting. Always keep this in mind. When a nation does what America is attempting to do, and to carve up Yehudah, and to give much of Yehudah's capital, its heart, Jerusalem, to Israel's enemies, God is not humored by that move. So here God is saying is exactly what is going to happen, and why it's going to happen, and that you can't survive as even Israel cannot survive when they discount the role that Yahweh plays in their lives. So once again, Yahweh spoke to Achaz to say, "For you ask for a sign by means of an association with the Yahweh, your God, one which is profound, one which would be difficult to question, even towering high into the highest dimensions." You're asking for a really, really powerful sign. This is from Yeshayah 7:10-11. Rather than simply reading Yahweh's testimony, which affirms that what we all need to know, religious and political devotees often want signs. They want things which can be deemed miraculous to reinforce their fledgling faith, a deficiency which needs constant stroking. You know, Catholics will sell for $100,000 a piece of toast that looks like it has the Madonna and Child on it. They'll flock by the thousands to statues that are rusting and appear to have tears running down the face of the Madonna and Child. They're desperate for miracles. They built whole shrines to an idol that was caught up in a fishing net, and will adorn that idol in fancy clothes. They want a sign. Well, God's provided a sign. His sign is his Torah. Read it. If you want to know who Yahweh is, read his Torah. He introduces himself to you. If you want God to prove his existence, read his Torah. He uses prophecy. to prove that he authored this book. You know, everything that he has said has come true exactly as he said it. If you're a rational, open-minded individual, God proves beyond any doubt that he exists, who he is, and that he authored this text. You don't need a miracle. I have never asked God for one. I have no interest in one. What a waste of time. I already know him. He's already proven who he is and the testimony he's inspired. To ask him to do more than that, be stupid. And if I want to understand more than I do now, if I want even more confidence that I have a correct understanding of who he is and what he's offering, all I need to do is spend a little more time reading. In fact, someone wrote me an email today and said, listen to the program, enjoy the program, read the books, enjoy the books. What resource would you recommend to teach us Hebrew? And my answer was that, I don't have a resource that I would recommend to teach somebody Hebrew. I would just study his testimony. That's how it happened for me. The more time I spent considering the words that God shared with us, the more I came to understand the language that he was using to communicate these ideas to us. It's really not any more complicated than that. If you are willing to observe, which is closely examine and carefully consider, what he has committed to writing for us to understand, then you will have all of the signs that you could possibly want. Every answer to every question that's material. It's all there. It's all been given to you. All you have to do is open your eyes and to focus on it. Just invest the time. By the way, Ahaz knew that. That's why God was willing to approach him. He was open to that reality. The king knew Yahowah. He had separated himself from the desires of the people in this regard. This is what the next statement says. But Ahaz said, I have not, I am not, and I will not actually ask. And nor was I, am I, nor will I attempt to put Yahowah to the test. There is no reason to do so. Once you know God, you don't need to put him to a test as if he were a carnival monkey on a leash. There's no reason to do that. He doesn't need to act for you. He's already acted, done everything that was necessary for him to do. Ahaz knew it. He knew the people wanted a sign because most of the people are lazy. They're unwilling to invest the time that is necessary to come to know Yahowah and understand what he's offering so that they can trust and rely on him. But it wasn't the case with Ahaz. And yet Yahowah, because of this approach, was willing to give Ahaz a marvelous sign. Yeah, he does it every day for me. I don't ask him for proof that he exists, or I don't ever ask him for proof that I'm correctly understanding what he said. But as I spend my days studying what he has revealed to us, I'm constantly given answers, insights. It's the same thing he did with Ahaz, the way he works. And so he said, please listen. Na Shama, I hope you will choose to hear this regarding the family of Dod. Question whether that from so few it would be possible that men would be so capable except with their God. Oh, there's a profound thought, isn't it? God initially said, here's the sign. Now, he's going to give him a more explicit sign, but his sign was just logical, right in your face. Israel today represents a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of 1% of the world's population. They occupy the most contested land on earth. It is surrounded by Muslims that outnumber them more than 100 to 1, and who outgun them more than 25 to 1. And so God's proposition to them would be the same as it was to the Israelites back then. Now listen to this, you descendants, you family of Daud. Why don't you question whether so few would be able to be so capable unless it was in concert with their God? You know, at the time, Israel was surrounded by Assyria, the most powerful nation on earth, on one side. They had the Egyptians on the other side. They had the Hittites above them. They were surrounded by the world's superpowers, all of which thought that the land of Israel was this perfect trading route that they wanted to control, for their militaries to march, for them to exercise trade and influence. And they were surrounded. But yet they endured. Now, the northern kingdom didn't, because it forgot all about God, but Jerusalem did, because they continued to trust and rely upon Yahowah. In fact, we'll consider what Hezekiah did in this regard, and why it worked for them, and why the northern kingdom was hauled off into slavery. We'll be back for the last segment in a moment. So, God is telling us that if you want to have an appreciation of how Israelites, which are the only racial group ever to lose their homeland for a long period of time. They were finally driven out of the province of Yahowah of Judah in 135 CE by 3 Roman legions. It took 3 Roman legions to subdue Yahowah, and only because at this point the uprising wasn't by those who had an affinity for Yahowah. It was a rabbinical uprising where Rabbi Akiba, the founder of rabbinic Judaism, started a revolution by promoting Bar Kokhba, a warlord, the son of a star, to messianic status, and said, you know, if you don't recognize my Messiah by Kokhba, and agree to fight on his behalf against Rome, that he would kill you. And of course, that was ill-fated. And 3 Romans subdued Israel, and they were dispersed throughout Europe. Hundreds of thousands of surviving Jews were crucified, and then the surviving population was hauled off into slavery. They built the Colosseum in Rome, as a matter of fact. But after some 1,900 years, they're brought back to the Promised Land, given their homeland back. It's unprecedented in human history. And God is saying, so who from my people that are enabled by their God and the promises that their God has made to them would find themselves in this position? Even today, how does a country survive the onslaught of the Muslims, who are better armed and outman them 100 to 1? How do they do it? You know, if you look at the 1974 Yom Kippur War, where Israel was attacked while observing Yom Kippur, and began on the Golan Heights, where the Syrians had 100 tanks to every one the Israelis had. And the Syrians had vastly superior Russian tanks, and the Israelites had cobbled together tanks from parts that they had scavenged around the world. And the Russian tanks had night vision, where the Israeli tanks did not. And the battle, as it waged into night, and the Israelites were so outnumbered, and they were blind on top of all of this, and yet outgunned 100 to 1, and vastly out-equipped technologically. Israel won the tank battle of the Golan. And at the same time that the Syrians were massing all of their forces against Israel in the north, the Egyptians were massing their air force and their artillery against Israel in the south simultaneously. And so here is Israel fighting on two fronts, unable to spare any airplanes or any support for the Golan. And yet, Israel prevailed. How is that possible? Apart from their God. Here's now the entire world abandoning Israel. The United States and Europe saying, you either capitulate and you sacrifice your land to these bloodthirsty Muslims, or else we will sanction you. The whole world's against them. And yet they're going to survive. How is that possible apart from their God? And their God made promises to them. Now that doesn't say that Yahowah was pleased with them. In fact, there was a protest today. Hundreds of thousands, some estimate 400,000 to 500,000 black-suited, black-hatted, curly-haired, fundamental Orthodox Jews marching in protest of the Israeli edict that every Israeli serve in the IDF, and that there will no longer be a stipend to be religious all day. And they're having a conniption fit. Now, I want to tell you, they claim that their purpose is to be Torah observant. There's not one of them that observes the Torah. They observe the Talmud. The Talmud are arguments against the Torah. God is not pleased with them. It was a repulsive show of dependence, of an inability to do what is right. And that's why so many Israelites are ultimately going to succumb in the war that is forecast, but they don't all need to.